Chapter 17. Salvadiah. Were I tired before, I am exhausted now. Were I exhausted then, I am drained now. And were I drained until this moment, I stand now, unsteadied, at the precipice overlooking a fall into a great hibernation. I withstood that gripping allure of resting my eyes as to allow the Flutora to coordinate our destination once more. Leastwise, for as long as I could. The last thing that I can recollect is finally succumbing to sleep's undeniable and enchanting trap. The grogginess from awaking ought to leave me soon, for I spent quite some time in my slumber. Perceiving the initial sighting of Grim and Gur's palace, I slip off of the Flutora a kalama shy from it, as I note that the shabby tower has at last crumbled. I can venture a guess as to what has so preoccupied the twins that they could not tend to it. I can only hope that Saba has not forsaken his patience with his hosts. As I near the complex, the stench of blood spill is nothing one may ignore lest they defile their own senses or humor their own comforting lies. The decorated structure that left me in awe when first I arrived has become no more than a trampled villa, and hole for rodents and insects to burrow into. The variety of the rare stones are tarnished and scattered about. The once elegant display of exotic flowers and vines are ripped and shriveled. Resting, lifelessly and in tatters against a cracked pillar, is the golem that Grim and Gur commanded, his light departed from him. I cannot catch any wind of Saba's presence with my track command. However, the fleeting lives of the twins signal and beckon to me. They are in the back quarters, along the fringes of their marred garden. There, following the smeared and cratered trail of their blood, I discover their whereabouts. Stones and pebbles form a dugout around their common body. Saba must have used his ability to pull them from the building and nearly flatten them against the wall that encompasses their property. The array of heavy jewels and precious metals these two don under and around their new torn and frayed garbs may have acted as an anchor for Saba to enact his powers upon. Being that he cannot affect flesh-like matter alone. They are bleeding profusely, but are otherwise motionless, if not for an occasional shiver from Grim. "What happened here?" I ask, though it is blatantly evident what sort of mishap occurred. I nudge them for a response. Upon closer inspection, it is apparent why they do not speak. Their tongues have been removed. Judging from their more fatal wounds, they have less than a few minutes before the curtain closes, give or take some seconds, and thus they have surrendered in fighting death's pull. There is no time to infiltrate their minds. I can only show them that I remained loyal to our agreement, even if Saba has not. Pulling the domes of Kishnu and Kara from their blood-soaked wrappings, I place them facing Grim and Gur. Only Grim cares to look over. No words are necessary. I can see clearly the sort of sentiment he emits. A hint of consolation has entered him. I am ashamed of their dying, for I gave them my word that no such fate ought befall them. They, too, showed interest in the Omani, albeit likely in a contrasting view from how it is that I am intrigued by the Tamas. Nevertheless, they carried no ill will towards us. I shut my eyes to forego witnessing their passing. However, my ears are as rebels to my intentions, for they stand present for the slaver's last breaths and the final beating of their shared heart. Ever since I had left home, I've been forced to look upon more corpses than the entirety of my life behind the walls of Essel. I bloodied my own hands not long ago. So, why do I feel hostility towards Saba? The armor that I wish to ask the twins for does not matter. Not nearly as much as their right to life does. Or, rather, did their lives not amount to anything at all? I could not possibly be the only one they sent to execute their enemies. And they did thus whilst attempting to use my stolen artifacts as bargaining chips at that. So, why? Why am I upset at their passing and enraged with Saba? Why do I remain conflicted? It's because of him. Pariahs. Your is terrifying. There is a remnant of his warriorhood that through hereditary means, through the long line after him and before me, has found its way into my being. Because of this, my focus is diverted from what is important. I must get a hold of myself. Here is my dilemma. There are but two paths to decide between. They are as such. Ought I track Saba down and rejoin with him? Or is it for the better that I make my way back into Uiti-Durve in hopes of acquiring a vessel so that I may traverse the sea and continue this quest alone? If the latter, it is inevitable that I am confronted with more racial friction without his accompanying me. And of the prior, it is plainly seen that he left on his own accord. Thus I need take into consideration that he would likely expect for me to meet with him. Although it is also feasible that he has more allies than I anticipated. Allies he has concealed. Nevertheless, it must, too, be taken into account the possibility that an unexpected matter may have arisen that required his immediate attention. Saba would not so readily abandon his ambition, and there is little he can do without the artifacts, nor without me, the incarnate capable of using them, insofar as obtaining the key is the principal matter. Then, there's also my virginity of the world, which ought to be factored into my decision. I am yet wildly ignorant of these vast lands and their many surprises. That settles it then. First I find Saba. Everything thereafter will be determined. I have visualized the path that he had trekked by the coalescence of my senses, and I did so with little effort once it was that my emotions had settled, leaving in their truancy a void which was then made full by the purity of focus. This proved far too trivial. The ease of my doing thus is rather disquieting. It is as though he wanted me to follow his lead and to find him. I am quite unsure why it is that I am disturbed by it, especially being that I suspected as much. After all, why would he not wish to reconvene? It is not as though he maintains a guilt for breaking his word to me. He does not strike me as the sort who might engage in such behavior. Guilt itself may be utterly foreign to him. Sa is scaling up from behind the horizon. I ought to set out now before any others show up. Given their palace's proximity to the notorious Port of Thieves, the chaos that erupted in my absence has doubtlessly drawn unwanted attention. My misgivings are validated as a clamorous din of marching footsteps approach from the south. Command, cloak. In hopes of a better view, I leap onto the second-floor balcony, which barely stands erect, but rather is slanted and held by the broken and folded columns. There are 6 Tamas raiders nearing the gates of the manor. From first glance they do not seem formidable. Upon closer surveillance, I note that 2 of them are brandishing Zyathori embroideries across their armbands, like those of the deceased and wretched duo. I ought not engage. There's no telling what sort of abilities they possess. Taking 2 out as opposed to 6 by means of ambush proved successful just recently. But 6? Even 4 would be too high of a gamble considering they hail from an accomplished clan. I was fortunate in my second encounter with Kishnu and Kara, with one of them being asleep. I'll sustain my cloak until I can get near to Saba. Then, perhaps, we may turn the tide on them ought they choose to pursue us. This is my assuming that they are hunting us to begin with. They make their way toward Grim and Gur's corpse. The one in front swings her head back suddenly and halts her advance. Has she caught wind of my scent? A rush of panic invades her. She's obviously in a great shock. I can see this clearly. But why? Ought I not be the one on edge in this moment? Abruptly, she overcomes her trauma in brief and jolts toward the departed pair, her party directly assembling behind her. It is nothing to do with Grim and Gur that has startled her. She falls to her knees, and then on all fours. She weeps. I tilt my ear, facing them.
Fish.
Her tone is without hope.
Kara.
She fumes without restraint. Placing her hands atop the heads of both of their disembodied comrades, a wicked snarl seeps from behind her clenched jaw.
This is no longer in our hands. The Zithori clan has been thinned.
The largest of them speaks.
I'll murder them myself.
Her voice bears no soul within it. No soul, no heart, no emotion. They are but words. That is all they are by one's perception of them, and the lack of spirit bringing them forth. And yet she means to realize every last one of them. She stares blankly in front of her, suspended in a trance, likely envisioning our demise.
You're familiar with our principal edict, which has been the same since our founding. For the sake of preserving our elite bloodline, we shall sacrifice only the weak, hence ensuring the survival of the strong. In the event that the clan becomes subject to the fatalities of 2 or more senior members, the Master will assume the
Mission of disposing the culprits of those casualties. Of course I know it.
Her tone hushed and stale. She drops her chin to her chest and folds forward, barely hanging from the support of her knees, swaying. Has she surrendered her ambition so easily?
We all know the edict. But since Relindur assumed leadership, he has been adamant about changing our ways. He is soft. He is not like us. He does not murder nor steal. His tongue tells no lies, and his charity will one day bankrupt us. He is quick to forgive our enemies, and though he has such magnificent power, he does little to avail us with it. Do you truly believe that he will take vengeance for us?
She says with her face drooping over the sand.
Goleth, we're leaving.
Giving no answer to her, the largest of them motions for their retreat to the smallest in their party. At this moment, Goleth's pupils shoot to the roof of his skull. He shakes like a rabid animal. His jittering is as a succession of vibrations with each passing moment, granting him considerable growth, his anatomy ripping through his attire. Goleth's size gains to rival that of a flutora, then expands furthermore. His frame balloons, chest puffed forth, with the crux of his weight carried by his enormous arms. Yet, as the transformation progresses, the lower half of his bottom reaches in size that of his upper. Flat-fisting the ground with his hind legs on their toes, he snorts and expels a heavy gust through his nostrils. The powerful draft blows away the surrounding dust and sand, clouding their presence. The rest of the crew climb atop Goleth and crawl into what seems like some sort of pouch across his upper back. What an astonishing brute! He is capable of a terrifying transformation, and he becomes a means of transportation for multiple passengers. The Zithori, they truly are a daunting and unique bunch. Goleth braces himself for takeoff, but before this, the apparent leader of their entourage protrudes his head from the pocket once more. He gazes directly at me. Goleth, that hosting beast, hurls itself, along with his voyagers, over the boundless desert with one swift and powerful motion. I've never experienced someone or something leap so. They appear the size of a far-off winged insect at such a height and distance. I am completely dumbfounded. Almost so much as to forget that one of them had discovered me. But I do not forget. No. His petrifying stare is at the forefront of my mind now. Kishnu and Kara must have been dear to him. He looked me dead in the eye, and I could see that forgiveness was a language distant and banished from his character. It cannot be mistaken. His intent was transparent and unfiltered. His gaze was as though a raw threat. And yet he elected not to act upon it due to their stated edict. Has their master such influence? Again, I am reminded of the ethics and similarities between our kinds. Both experience loss of life and react with grief. Both have rules and regulations they uphold, despite personal conflict. Both are living, breathing, and thinking beings, enshrined in their cultures and preserved in their traditions. The last point ought be enough to quell the steaming tension. Unfortunately, many will not adopt this standard. Omani are like the Tamas, and wolves are like raiders and the Zithori, yet we cannot come to recognize this. Why? Could it be that commonality alone isn't enough? Or that the discrepancies greatly outweigh the affinities? I mustn't waste any more time speculating. I have to get to Saba. Expanding my awareness to its limits, I locate his signature once again. He's stationary, right on the bounds of my internal vision. Somehow, he's gotten to know my capabilities and their restrictions. It is no coincidence that he has traveled just far enough to place a secure gap between himself and our pursuers, yet just near enough that his location is discernible to me alone. He is as cunning and as calculating as always. My hunt encroaches a rigid and thin canyon. Under the entrance, kneeled over whilst sharpening his blade, my presence does not go unnoticed by the cognizant Tamasu.
How many of them were there?
He speaks nonchalantly, now polishing the finish. I counted 6. They were upset. Crossing my arms, I tap one elbow with my index finger, impatiently waiting for his explanation as to why he did what he had done. After several strokes of the whetstone upon his dagger, he speaks.
Ugly and uglier were plotting to rid themselves of those pests. Kill the overly heroic wolf.
He points at me, then continues, both in his explanation and in his sharpening his dagger.
But their divisive, self-serving ways go deeper than such a simple transaction. I eavesdropped on the blemished pair. Grim and Gur alerted the rest of the Zyathori of Kara and Kishnu's impending doom to be ushered in by a wolf. Of course, they left out that the order to kill them was their own. They timed and methodically designed it near perfectly for you to show up when the clan did, so that they could ask for your head as a prize for being informants. However, it didn't pan out so smoothly for them now, did it?
He lets out a short chuckle and then proceeds.
They needed you dead for a reason. They found that the artifacts couldn't be pulled more than 15 armor from you. They've somehow bonded to your aura. Those swindlers assumed that your death would result in breaking that chain. And thus, they gambled on whether or not you had this knowledge yourself when they asked for some sort of leverage from you. Were you to take the relics along on your mission, attempting to slay 2 enemies with one swing? Or rather, 2 enemies with one stratagem. I was to be turned in for treason. Masterfully, they would have effectively recouped their investment for their procurement of us, eliminated their enemies, and retained the artifacts all in one grand scheme. Those twins were quite the tacticians.
Again he laughs. I did not know what to expect when I found him. Despite his apparent amusement right now, his story does not have any holes in it. The raiders discovered the bodies of their fallen comrades and proceeded to discuss informing their superior, constrained by a code that forbade them from taking any further measures. One of the Zyathori caught sight of me, gazing fixedly into my eyes even as I remained concealed within my cloak. Subsequently, they departed without delay. Saba freezes by the delivery of this report.
Their master is one of 2 Tamasu that I hoped I'd never have to fight.
The stress he's currently emitting is a polar reflection of his base demeanor. He transitions from a proud warrior to a forcibly drafted soldier in a matter of seconds. I do not know which to ask first. Who is the other one, or how powerful is the leader of Zyathori?
Ivyar is the other. Chief battlemonger and supreme commander of the Tamas military. Second in ascendancy only to the queen.
He kept speaking, and thus I did not have to choose between my inquiries. I know of Ivyar. He is Yindra's counterpart in the Tamas world. Even he applauds Ivyar's strength.
Him I could, at best, hold off long enough to figure an escape, but I cannot do battle with the Salvadiah.
He hammers his fist into the canyon wall. Salvadiah? I do not understand. The leader of the Zyathori serves also as some religious prophet?
The Zithori chief, who is one of an inexplicable origin, is but 14 years old, yet he holds the aptitude to bring both of our civilizations to their knees.
Power alone does not deserve your faith. What could he deliver you to, aside from a painful death? I ask him this intently.
Power is our only god. It is especially so for the Zithori, who revere it even more than the common raider. Thus, one with enough of it is exalted as one. It is either this, or they are believed to be the closest in proximity to a true god.
He stares vacantly up at the drifting sky. Then if it comes to it, you will do battle with a god. It is as simple as that. I make an attempt to reaffirm his veteran spirit. Saba stands and gazes behind and above me with his left hand shielding his eyes from the slow-rising saw. I turn to find a distant Blackwing flying our way.
It appears as though we may no longer have a choice in the matter.
His words ring a bell of dismay.